Hey guys. Long time no see. It's been a
Thank you
while.
for meeting with us.
Were you there the first?
I was there. I don't think I interviewed with you.
Okay.
Lieutenant Studley was
Lieutenant Studley at that
with
time.
me the first time.
I don't
So.
remember a lot.
Yeah, oh, you're okay.
I don't blame you. It's a lot all at once. And
Usually long time no see is a good thing when you're dealing with a detective.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, but I know that both of my kids have mentioned both of you by names, and particularly with you. And
He's a good kid.
Do you guys by chance have a card?
I do in the car,
I don't have
Okay.
one.
but not
Okay.
on me. So I'll grab that for you though.
Okay.
So, like I talked to Mr. Kester about, I just want this to be totally ran by you. I won't ask you any questions that are incriminating. We're not looking at you as a suspect or anything like that. We just are more curious of the dynamic and Jody coming into your relationship, your lives. So, if you kind of just want to walk us through that on how she came into your lives and then where things started to change.
Jody, you mean?
Jody.
Or-
Jody.
I thought
Jody.
you said Julie, but
Oh,
you meant
Jody.
Jody.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jody. Yeah.
yeah, I can do that. I'll ask first, have you found the pen papers?
The pen papers. So we found quite a bit
They're-
of different
We
journals.
believe they're on the computer, and the rest of them are sealed, like they're trying to mail them off. But we do not have a direct copy of it, no.
Because my understanding was we had purchased as a Christmas present for Jody in 2021 a leather folder that, 3 inches thick or whatever, and it had engraved on the leather on the outside the pen papers, and Ruby wrote detailed notes of everything, all interactions with Jody and Pam Botcher from August 2021 until I don't know when.
And you're saying something like, is it like a satchel looking leather bit, or is it more like a binder?
No, it's like I don't even know what to call it. But
it's flat. You
it's
said
well,
we
yeah.
found something.
So
It's
you
just like a
see
shorter, because we do have Ruby's journal, which is from those dates that you mentioned.
these
about this
things
big?
are going to be so. She wouldn't write the stuff she wrote in the pen paper. She would not write in her journal. The stuff she wrote in the pen papers was not intended to be read by anybody until God would decree them to be written as scripture for the whole world to read.
Okay.
I believe that's what we
We have that.
have.
Okay.
Because you're saying the pen would be different, correct? It's like a.
Well, it was just in a thing called the pen papers. So it was, and that's how Ruby referred to those papers.
Yeah.
So it described all of the visions and trances and everything that Jody and
How
Ruby
thick-
went into.
How thick would you say it was?
It was like 3 inches thick or so. And there were hundreds of pages of written documents that Ruby had. And that was given to Jody in 2022 when she left and returned to her home in January. So,
This is similar.
yeah, like it would look like that.
Okay.
That's not the journal that we have, so
No, I think you're talking, it looks like a satchel. Or
It's something Jody would not want found,
yeah.
but she wouldn't want to destroy it.
Because
either.
we
Found the
didn't find
empty
that
one.
in the
We
home.
found an empty one.
We did find an empty one.
I don't
So
remember saying anything
Oh.
on it though. There's an empty thing like that.
Yeah.
There was a full thing, but it was.
If
dated
the
further back.
empty one says the pen papers on the outside of it, then they emptied it
I
and
don't-
did
I
something.
don't remember.
we'll go
that.
back through our photos and see if that's
Yeah.
because everything in the
If-
home was photographed. So.
If you're interested in Pam Botcher,
Mhm.
that's going to tie Pam Botcher to all of this. What's in those documents?
Okay.
Okay, so
Can I just interrupt for a minute? I'm sorry.
Sure.
is it okay to bring the puppies?
Yes, we want the puppies, right?
Okay.
Okay, so why don't you finish here and then call me when you're done and we'll,
Okay.
Hey, will you let the bailiff know we're in here so she can bring us a copy of the order?
okay, let me see if I can find them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
In 2018, we were cycling that's going to be hard to find in today's world. Good luck. Ruby had a very close friend named Paige Hanna, who lives in Mapleton, who was a massive fan of Connections and Jody Hildebrandt. In fact, the Hannas are on the cover of their book. If you've probably seen them. And so Ruby started to speak with Jody towards the end of 2018, early 2019, with the intention of having her be the therapist to Jody. Jody always had a larger interest in communicating with the parents more than with the actual patient, which I always found curious. But her theory was, if you want to help your child, you have to help yourself first, and then you'll know how to help the child. So she spoke with Ruby frequently, and the frequency of their communications ramped up. And then the first conversation that Jody had with Chad was in June of 2019 while we were on a trip to the East Coast. All of her visits with Chad virtual through Zoom. But she would talk with Ruby on the phone or through Zoom quite frequently. So Jody met with things got really it got strange around the fall of 2020. The Hannas were trying to convince and bring Ruby into thank you.
Thanks.
Into this organization called Connections, and that particularly were focused on things like lust versus love, and healthy marriages, happier marriages, happier relationships. She invited me to go to it was like a conference or something held at Thanksgiving Point in Lehigh. And there were like 100 people there, and that was in the fall of 2019, maybe late summer of 2019, late summer 2019. And my impression at that time was this is absolute craziness. This is a bunch of man-hating women that are just looking for excuses to tear down their husbands, and I mean that's what it felt like to me when I was in there. But it was confusing because there were people that I respected a lot that were up on the stage with microphones in hand, giving testimonials of how great this was and how it changed their lives and their marriage, and like the Hannas were among them, and so yeah, it was confusing. Ruby, then we went on a trip with the Hannas to the UK in October of 2019, and I swear the whole objective of the trip was to convince me to get into Connections, because all of them were in it except me, but they made some really eloquent arguments, and I agreed to join a men's group with Jody in January of 2020, and I would do it for 3 months. So I started that men's group in 2020, and the group, I don't know if you've ever been to an addiction recovery group, but that's what it was. That's what it felt like. I mean, there were probably 10 men in there. It was on Zoom. All of them were working through various stages of sex addiction, porn addiction, drug addiction, and it was just it was like a 12-step group, but intended just for general addiction recovery, and I really was like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't belong here. But everyone's like, no, come here, like you can learn to have a better like life and a better marriage. And so I thought, okay, whatever. I went through my obligatory 3 months, and I was ready to leave. And then I got challenged to.
Oh, thank you.
And then I got challenged to sit down and have a vulnerable conversation with my wife and ask her how my lustful choices have affected her. And, to me, that was like a loaded question. I thought, I still didn't see what I had done or anything that would constitute any form of like, abuse or anything like that. And, but I did. I took the challenge and I sat down, and for 2 hours, Ruby very emotionally just shared how she felt in our marriage and how the things that I, over 20 years of marriage, asking for sex as a husband frequently, or asking her to wear lingerie or things like that, how that made her feel. And it was really emotional, and it touched me. Like, I didn't realize that she felt so strongly about that she felt so hurt by that. And so I committed that I would really give it a go. And I stayed in the men's group. And so, in that men's group, I met with Jody every week, with the other men that were in the group. And then it got weird because like our marriage felt like it was getting better and stronger. So this was now, summer and fall of 2020. And in addition to that, there was the whole YouTube cancel thing. I don't know how much you guys are even interested or aware of that, but in May of 2020, some videos that Ruby released on that dealt with Chad just blew up in her face, and it was all over the news, and hundreds of thousands of TikTokers and all this stuff were just piling on and basically burned down like our YouTube channel. And overnight, like the income went, we lost 90% of the income overnight, and that was hard.
Was this like which episode was this? Was this the one where they talked about like the bean bag? Or Okay.
Yeah, and then they started going back and trying to dig and find, and then they'd find these little nuggets like, oh, look, Eve went to school without a lunch one day, or stuff like that. But it was the beanbag video that really set people off.
So then they went back from there.
Mm-hmm. So at that time, Ruby was really distraught, and she was looking for support. She was looking for someone who would understand her, who would validate her, and she found that in Jody. All the stuff she did with Chad was because of Jody, and so it makes sense that she would go to Jody, for emotional support when she felt like her world was burning down. In the meantime, I felt like our marriage was getting stronger. It felt better. Like we didn't fight as much, and even though we were having less sex, it felt more connecting, and it was just. I thought, wow, this is great. Like, this is great, and I was happy to be the guy up on the stage. That started sometime in like late 2020 or the fall of 2020. There would be a conference, and Ruby would say, I thought we were just attending it, but then she'd say, hey, they wanted us to get up and tell our story, and I'm like, oh, okay, sure. And so I'd get up and just say, like, yeah, I was the guy who said, I think this is a bunch of like, man-hating, women, but it really has made a difference in my marriage, and it really did. Like, I believed it. And so those conferences and stuff, everything continued like that until March of 2021, when after a conference, a connections conference down in St. George, all the inner circle, all the people who were being trained as mental fitness coaches and stuff. So that was Ruby and a bunch of other people and their spouses. We went out to like a dinner afterwards, and that's where Jody really opened up to the women in a private conversation that she believed she was being tormented and haunted by shadow figures every night, and that was spooky, and I don't know exactly what happened, but the Hannahs do. All I know is at some point within a couple days of that, in that month of March, the Hannahs drove down from Mapleton and picked Jody up and brought her back to their home in Mapleton, and she lived for 6 weeks in that home in Mapleton. And this is where, I don't know what happened, but I do know that there's two different sides of stories. They tried to introduce her to a new cult lady that the Hannahs were getting into. So they wanted to merge their cults into one, apparently. And
They referred to it as a cult at the time?
oh no. No one in a cult says, I'm in a cult.
Right. I was wondering. But from your perspective, it looks like two cult leaders merging together.
From where I stand now, absolutely. According to Jody, she was held against her will for 6 weeks and was kidnapped, and she escaped and got out. According to the Hannahs, after 6 weeks of Jody stabbing herself with forks and knives, cutting herself, and wanting to commit suicide and trying to seduce the husband of the family, they kicked her out. I don't know what's the truth. Maybe a little bit of both, I don't know. But the point is, somewhere around mid-April, Jody was back in her home in Ivins, and she was a hot mess. And she reached out to Ruby for help. And Ruby was always jealous of the Hannahs, that they had a better relationship with Jody than she did. Ruby, and this is goes back to her childhood. She wanted to be the best friend. She wanted to be the most liked. She wanted to be the one that everybody knew. And so it hurt her that she felt like she was being excluded from what was going on at the Hannah's house. And then she'd say, why are so many secrets? And the Hannahs would say, it's not secret, it's sacred. And when the time's right, you can know too, So we went down to Jody's house in May of 2021. That was the first time I'd ever been there. And it blew my mind, as I'm sure you have walked in there and gone, how does a therapist live like this? Didn't make sense to me. But we were there, and she opened up and talked about, her struggles and what was going on. And I gotta say, I'm a smart guy. I'm an engineer. I've designed and helped build some really big stuff. I've been a college professor. I can't explain some of the stuff that happened while we were there. Like crashes in the basement while we were talking upstairs, and plates in the kitchen just flying off by themselves, full speed, smashing on the wall and falling to the floor by themselves. I can't explain it, but I saw it with my own eyes, and I don't have any way to explain it other than there's some crazy shit going on. Ruby was convinced that we could intervene and help Jody. I didn't want a thing to do with it. I tried to like get her bishop involved and say, hey, go to the priesthood and the church and all that stuff. Just go to your support network. But Ruby continued to be like, no, we can help. Like, she doesn't want that. Could you imagine like what happened to her reputation if this got out and stuff? Let's help her. So we went down like a couple more times between May and August, but it reached the point where in August, her bishop at the time, a guy who's down there in Cayenta named Scott Galbraith, he's not our bishop anymore, but I mean, he was going over there like every night, and he'd be there for like 4 hours, and he'd be like, I'm fighting evil spirits, I'm casting demons out, I'm crazy stuff going on, and finally he got to the point where he's like, I can't do this anymore. Like, there needs to be some sort of resolution. It was at that point that they said, why don't you take her up to your house? And I was like, oh, hell no. Like, I don't want this in my house. But I was beaten over the head with it. Like, that's really insensitive. You know, she's done so much to help our family, and you're being selfish, and she has needs, and come on, like, it won't be for long. And so I relented, and I was like, okay, actually, you know, this could kind of be fun. Let's just make it fun, and we'll, like, she needs a vacation, so we'll just go take drives up the canyon and stuff like that. And it turned into just like crazy house. The moment she showed up in my house, just the weirdest crap started happening. Lights turning on and off, sounds of people walking in walls, and like sounds like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and like stuff floating around, and it was weird, and I hated it. And I became the resident exorcist. That was the title I came up with myself. I thought it was kind of funny, but it was my job to like go and give her blessings whenever she started to like go into a trance and go into possession, and which started to be a lot. And Ruby would go up and check on her. It started like every 4 hours at night, and then it moved every 2 hours at night, then it moved every hour at night, and then at some point Ruby said, you know what, I'm just going to start sleeping in there, and if I need you, I'll come down and get you. I'm like, that's kind of weird, but okay. And that was that. They started sleeping in the same bed, and then she started having like trances and stuff. I would say probably September, where she believed that she was going to heaven and seeing God and Jesus and talking with them. And she would get together with Pam Botcher. Ruby, Pam, and Jody would get together and do these interventions. That's what they called them. And so they'd just go up and lock themselves in a room for 4 or 5 hours, and then they'd come out and they'd all just be on cloud nine, and Ruby would share with me like she had this amazing vision, and I wrote it and recorded it all down, and we have a work to do from God, and you're part of it, and the bishop's part of it, and we're all part of bringing all this stuff to the world. And so it was, and it continued like that until I wanted to move on with life. And I would call it dragging my heels, so that was around October, and Jody flipped out because during one intervention, Chad was in the backyard with a bunch of friends, and it was my job to keep all the kids contained in the basement watching movies or playing video games. And I took the dog on a walk, and I thought they were done, but they weren't done. And Chad had all his high school friends over in the backyard. Jody flipped out. She was ready to come back to Ivan's on her own that night, and Ruby and Pam talked her into staying. But that was the first night where Ruby said, "I want a separation from you." And it was an in-home separation. And so it was it was hard. Basically, there were all these rules now placed on me. Like, I could leave when I wanted, but I couldn't come back until Ruby gave me permission. I couldn't come into the kitchen to eat until Ruby gave me permission. And the upstairs where Jody roamed was completely off limits. I couldn't go upstairs anymore in my own house. And there would be, Ruby would dictate all of the terms of how our interactions would be, when we would talk, and that was hard. And it was during that time that I really became, I would say, dependent upon Ruby. Like, if she said a kind word to me, like, my whole day was made, right? And so that separation continued all the way up until the holidays, maybe the last week of December, first week of January, and then Ruby ended that separation. Jody went home the second week of January. But by that time, like, Ruby, Pam, and Jody were completely determined to do this work that they felt God had for them. And I thought it was crazy. Like, I thought it was just batshit crazy. Like, Ruby, you have a reputation, you have a multi-million-dollar business, you have a brand, and you are just giving it away. She wanted to legally, like, work with Jody's attorney to basically give Jody 8 passengers and become an employee of Connections. So basically the contract was Ruby gives Jody everything and Ruby gets nothing in return. Our manager, our YouTube manager at the time, was like, red flags, like, I don't know how to tell you, she is scamming you. Ruby fired him. And I was like, I believe our manager, I think he's right. And Ruby started threatening me with another separation. And just like, this isn't about money, this is about doing God's work. And so we continued in that dynamic for the next 6 or 7 months until she went on a trip with Jody and Pam down to Arizona. And I think they, like, when I read her journal, she went into Mexico or something and bought drugs or something, like prescription drugs for the emergency kits. And when she came back from that trip, before she even brought the bags into the house, she pulled me in and said, I want to talk with you. And that's when she asked me to leave. And that was July 20th, 2022. My interactions with Jody at that point became one of Jody. I was still in the men's groups, but the dynamic changed. Instead of being like one of the top people that helped run groups and helped support, all of a sudden I felt like I got knocked to the bottom. And Jody was just piling on me every week in the men's groups. And the other men just do whatever Jody does. If Jody piles on somebody, they all pile on. If Jody praises somebody, they all praise. And so it really felt like a pack of dogs. and Jody was the alpha. And whoever she, sicked the dogs on, they would go. Whoever she praised, the dogs would just lick them up and down. And that's how these groups went. And so once I was in separation, every week was just hell, psychological hell. And Jody was running it. Everything was on Zoom. And I knew that the only way I would ever get back into my house was I had to get Jody's approval. If I didn't get Jody's approval, I would never get Ruby's approval. But it felt like an impossible task, because no matter what I did, no matter how much I tried to track better, be truthful and not be selfish, every week it was like, you're being manipulative, you're being selfish, you're lying, you're hiding something, you're still hiding stuff. And I really started to question my sanity, honestly.
And this was
After a while.
Jody that we were talking about.
And so that continued for an entire year, but it became more and more and more and more and more isolating until Jody had an approved list of men that I could make phone calls to, and it was basically 3 men. But all 3 of those 3 men were like, we don't want to do phone calls with you anymore because you're being manipulative. And I'm like, well, who told you that? Well, Jody did. So I was completely cut off. And if I went to my church leaders, I was seeking enablement. If I went to my family, I was seeking enablement. If I went to anybody, I was seeking enablement. And so it felt like a no-win. I felt trapped. And that's where I was all the way up until the last week of July, when Jody called me one day out of the blue and just said, I don't understand why you're not getting it. You're not changing. I don't get it. So I've been asking God what to do, and God told me that you need to have complete, what's the word they would use? Solitude with God.
Become a monk.
Yeah. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, I don't want you to come to men's group anymore. And I don't want you to do phone calls with any of the men. And I'm like, well, then who am I going to talk with? Who's going to support me? God will. You need to learn to go to God. And so I'm just like, there's nobody. You're just, I'm going to be completely cut off. And she's like, no, you'll have God. So that was the last week of July, and that was my last interaction and contact with Jody. But it was strange because around that time, things with Ruby started picking up, and I didn't understand why, but Ruby wanted to meet in a parking lot and wanted me to sign over titles of documents, the 2 of our cars wanted me to sign them over to her name. And
To Ruby.
Mm-hmm. But I was like, okay, I'm just not, I'm in total compliance mode at this point. Just I'm a good husband, you see, you can trust me. And so whatever she asked, sign over the cars to me, no questions, just okay. And then another thing, she was like, I might want to do an investment, but I will need your signature. Do you trust me enough that I could get your signature if I wanted to pursue my own investment? Yeah, sure. Whatever you say.
How big of an investment was she talking about? What did she tell you?
She never did, and I never signed anything. She never brought anything to me. But when I returned to the house, everything was packed up, and a neighbor came over and said she asked for the HOA rules and mentioned to him that she wanted to rent the house out, which I was like, yeah, are you kidding me? And she wanted to sell the house, but couldn't because my name was on the mortgage. And I think that's what she was talking about, of, will you sign something if I just put it in front of you? And you know what? I probably would have. Like, that's how messed up I was.
I'm glad you didn't.
Me too. That would have been disastrous.
Yeah.
But I can't describe to you what torture and hell it was to live an entire, it was more than a month really, in complete isolation. Believing that I was like evil and, I mean, manipulative and lying and selfish, and that I had abandoned my family, and that I was more interested in my selfishness than my family.
And I think moving forward, you going through that is going to be extremely helpful. I felt that way because a lot of those are the same words that were used with them, and you're going to understand how they felt, you know.
We've already talked about that,
Yeah.
actually. In the couple of times we've met, I've said, this is how I felt. Did you feel that way? Like, yes, this is how I felt. Like, when we each confess to things that we didn't do, I'm like, I confess to things I never did, but I was so scared. And he's like, that's what I did too. So we connected on that level, you know, and it's crazy that anybody can get to that level of desperation, but we were there. We were there.
Oh.
And this was the end of July, what you're saying? End of July 2022, or the last time you saw Jody was
23.
23. Okay.
The last communication I had with Jody was the last week of July. Might have been like the first couple days of August, but just
So
that
it's just
little
shortly
time.
before we made contact with you.
Yeah,
Or
a
you
month.
made contact with us.
A month before.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for that whole month, my life was literally wake up, exercise, go to work, pretend everything's okay, come home, do connections like workbooks and read scriptures and try to strip selfishness out of my life. Like, go to bed, wake up, repeat every day, boom, 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 boom. I mean, I was so upside down. And my plan was in 6 months I get to reach back out to Jody again, and she'll let me back in the group, and then I can prove. Oh, I don't know if I heard a door knock, but it's
Don't have one for there, too.
Might be your kids.
might be. Oh,
And we can,
has it been an hour?
Almost.
I told you it wouldn't take an hour.
So take a couple minutes.
I'm
and
sorry.
we're good too if you need to head out. That was seriously,
I guess
we just
only-
wanted, yeah.
The only questions I would have, and just going back, you said that she was having like these visions of like were you ever privy enough to understand or be told what those visions were?
A couple of them.
What were the two that should we tell you about?
So, like, one of them, she was walking along the beach with Jesus, and Jesus challenged her to go walk on the water, and it was a whole lesson on walking on the water. Another, she would walk with Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, and she learned about, she had a pet lion in heaven named Charles. I don't know why I never forgot that name, but it was like this massive lion, and she got to ride the lion and learned that, you know, all about who she was and this pet lion and all. There was another one where there was a lot of satanic ones where when she would go into possession mode, she would talk in like different voices. It was really creepy. But the voices would say, she's ours, we're not letting go. She is Satan's bride. She's mine. I'm going to marry her. So if she was faking it, she believed that she was trying to, or Satan wanted her as her bride.
And then you said, just clarifying, so the last time you saw the kids was when you separated that in July, is that what I'm
20th.
thinking? Of 2022. Do you have any questions for us?
No, I'm just really interested in the pen papers. Like, for my own curiosity, I want to know what was going on in all of those little interventions. And
I'll look back through the photos because, like I said, we documented everything in the home, whether we took it or if we didn't. And then I'll reach out to Mr. Kester and let you know.
So I have
But-
a couple of observations when you're done.
Yeah, go for it.
So I always thought it was interesting, now that you mentioned that she was riding a lion. Kevin told me that when they were having these group meetings, she would never show up. She would show up on the WebEx, but in place of her person would just be this X for the connection. So it's like this Wizard of Oz thing going on. And I just thought that
she
was
never
kind
showed
of-
her face.
Kind of eerie.
She
Yeah.
always covered herself.
Yeah.
Like, even in the hottest of summer, she would wear these hoodies. She would smell so bad.
Yeah.
She would
Mhm.
never bathe, but she was trying to hide her arms and stuff because apparently Ruby told me they were just like mutilated. And
So the other thing that I think it's important for them to know is during that whole time when you were out, you only had communication with Ruby maybe 3 or 4 times. But
Yeah.
that each time, or at least on some of the occasions you spoke to her, she's telling you that everything's blissful, we're doing well, everything's so much better without you. And,
oh, that would be communicated to me by Jody every week.
okay.
And the men's groups too. And it was just like, you're abandoning your family. And it always hurt so bad because it's like, I want to be with my family so bad. What do you mean I'm abandoning them? If you wanted to be with your family, you would change. You would stop being selfish. But you keep being selfish, so you want it. And it was just felt like, well, how do I stop wanting it then? It's like, then you must change. Well, how do I change? Well, you gotta want it. Well, what? So how do I want it? You gotta change. It's this like
Perpetual cycle.
yeah,
And-
there's no. I tried to find my way into that cycle, and it felt like, have you ever had a dream where there's like a problem you're trying to solve, but you can't solve it, and how frustrating you feel? That's what my life felt like. And as I'm looking back and I'm realizing there was no solution. There was, you either had Jody's approval or you didn't. I wasn't doing anything different than the other men in the group. But they got her approval, so they were praised and they were repenting and they were doing everything right. I, on the other hand, was manipulative and selfish and enabling and all blah, 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 blah. And she became like the arbiter of truth, the arbiter of forgiveness, God's own mouthpiece. And it was just messed up.
Well, I'm glad that you're seeing
Realizing that.
clearly, and
Coming out of the
kind of
fog.
came out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah.
One last
Mhm.
discussion. So, in the home, when the warrant was issued, there was a bag with $85,000 cash in
Yes.
it. And I understand her lawyer, Ruby's lawyer, has all that
I'm not.
Which home are we talking about?
Ivan.
In
in
Ivans?
the Ivan's home.
We don't know. The money was left where it was left. We didn't take
Yeah.
it. With this,
So-
the house was secured when we left. We're assuming that Lamar Windward
Yeah,
was
he
able
has
to
it.
retrieve it. But we don't, I can't tell you
Yeah.
one or the other. if we did.
So, here's kind of the issue. That money, she cleaned out their bank accounts.
the kids' savings account.
Yeah, and yours too, your joint account.
Yeah.
That's where that money came from.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you can have, or if I need to have a discussion with the county attorney. Kevin would kind of like his kids' money back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it would be civilly, so I would go address that.
Talk to Lamar. and
Lamar,
see,
yeah.
see what those funds are being used for.
I don't think he wants to give them up. And I wouldn't either if I were
Yeah,
him.
yeah.
I think he's using it for attorney fees.
Yeah,
I don't know if the county attorney is gonna be able to separate that out unless the judge has already separated it out. Even the county attorney's gonna look at it and go, it's civil, it's both your guys' money in some sense, and
But
then
if you
the judge would
did-
have to divide that up to where it goes, we couldn't do that. Because the county attorney wouldn't.
if you did go civil though, I feel like that would be your fastest route to,
It's just dirty what she did.
Yeah.
She
No.
stole
Yeah.
money. She stole money from my 18-year-old son out there. And it's wrong.
Well, the other thing that you didn't, that, I don't know, I mean, there's a lot there, but I think they need to know that while Jody was living in your home, she was also purportedly giving therapy to Chad, and Chad was
Every
paying
week.
her. And he's like, what,
At that time, we
15,
were
16?
paying her.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't until Chad moved out that part of his therapy was he needed to pay for his own therapy. So at age 17, he was paying her $900 a month to get
Dad
brainwashed.
at 17?
He did.
What was he doing for work?
He worked at he's a lifeguard, basically.
Okay.
Lifeguard supervisor at
So
two
much of his
different rec
check.
centers.
Yeah.
So it was like the majority of his check was going to Jody.
He was paying her more than he's paying rent, wasn't he?
So,
3 times as much.
That's crazy.
She's not a nice
Obviously, you've
person.
seen her house, and what she has, she's making, there's a lot of money going around. And there's a lot of money, I don't know if we can, sorry, I've been a little sick. I'm not sure if we know where that money came from or where it went. Like, it doesn't seem like she's had an income within the past little bit, so.
Were her book sales
I can't imagine. I can't imagine they were. But, anyway, I need to get my kids.
yeah, we'll
You're
definitely
good,
let you go.
thank
And
you.
thank you so much for your time, we appreciate
I
it.
want to cooperate though in anything related to Jody and Pam.
Mhm.
And if I can help.
Well, we appreciate
We'll reach
that.
out to your attorney if that's okay, if we have any other questions, maybe we can do it over the phone or something, we'll have to meet in person. We can just